What if I told you a 14-year-old girl walked through her front door on a sunny April morning, calling out for her mom,
Okay.
only to find her mother's lifeless body on the living room floor, bound with medical tape, gagged with her own underwear, lying in a pool of blood?
An absolute nightmare.
And her brother and his friend were nearby, their skulls shattered by hammer blows.
And the murder weapons. They were just casually left on a table, almost like someone had just finished a meal.
This was April 12, 1981, Cabin 28, Keddie, California. 3 people slaughtered.
But that wasn't all. The youngest daughter, 12-year-old Tina Sharp, she was missing.
Vanished. And then 3 years later, to the exact date, her skull was found 62 miles away in the wilderness.
Here's the most infuriating part. Investigators had confessions. They had DNA evidence. They even found the murder weapon.
The suspects confessed to a therapist, they wrote letters admitting it, they were questioned, and then they were just allowed to leave.
And both of them died free men. After 44 years, there have been no arrests.
This isn't a mystery. This is how evil confesses and walks away. Corruption from a small-town sheriff to organized crime to federal agencies.
This is the Keddie Cabin Murders, where justice was buried alive.
Welcome to Whispers of Crime podcast show.
The emotional weight of this case it's immense. But the historical frustration, when you really look at the files, is almost heavier.
It really is. This is a story about victims. Glenna Sue Sharp, her children, a family friend, all devastated by just unbelievable brutality in this remote part of Northern California.
But the analysis looking back, it shows decades of failure. That's what makes the grief so much worse.
Because this case, based on everything we have, it really should have been closed in 1981.
It's devastating.
Yeah.
The path to solving it seems so clear, but the justice system, for reasons we have to explore, just completely failed the Sharp family.
So we're focusing on one night, April 11th into April 12th, 1981, at Cabin 28 in the Keddie Resort, Plumas County, California.
And to really understand what happened, you have to understand the place itself. Keddie Resort. The name sounds nice, but it was really this small, isolated, kind of rustic railroad town, deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Very quiet.
Tucked away from everything.
Exactly. And Sue Sharp, who was 36, a single mother of 5, she moved her family there in March of 1979. She was trying to get a new start, leaving what was reportedly an abusive husband back in Connecticut.
And by the fall of 1980, they'd settled into Cabin 28.
Right. So the family living there was Sue, her son John, who was 15, her daughters Sheila, 14, and Tina, who was 12, and then her 2 younger sons, Rick, 10, and Greg, who was just 5.
They were just looking for some stability, some safety in this really remote place.
And that night, the 4 known victims were Sue, her son John, his friend Dana Hall-Wingate, who was 17, and of course Tina Sharp, the 12-year-old who disappeared.
When you think about how isolated Keddie was, that remoteness, it has to be a major factor, doesn't it? I mean, this isn't some big city.
It's a critical factor.
The attacker or attackers, they had to be local, right? Someone who knew the area, knew the family's routine, knew just how vulnerable they were in that specific cabin.
The isolation isn't just a backdrop. It's a key variable in analyzing the crime. In 81, Keddie was extremely tight-knit. It's a tiny community. The cabins are close. People knew their neighbors. They knew their habits.
So a stranger would have stuck out like a sore thumb.
Immediately.
Yeah.
And the fact that the attack happened overnight, inside the home, with 3 other kids sleeping feet away, it points directly to someone with a high degree of confidence, someone with intimate knowledge of the cabin layout and the family's movements.
It just completely argues against some random killer passing through.
It does. It strengthens the focus on local suspects from the very beginning.
So let's talk about the timeline, the movements leading up to that night, April 11th. It helps to understand just how normal the day was before it turned into a nightmare.
It was a relatively normal Saturday. In the afternoon, around 3:30, John Sharp and his friend Dana Wingate hitchhiked toward Quincy. Probably just to hang out with friends, pretty common thing for teenagers to do.
And Sue was at home.
Yes. Sue was at the cabin with her younger children, Rick and Greg, and their friend Justin Smart, who was sleeping over that night.
And the oldest daughter, Sheila, was nearby, but, and this is so crucial, she wasn't actually inside Cabin 28 when the attacks happened.
That's right. Sheila, who was 14, left Cabin 28 a little after 8 p.m. to spend the night right next door in Cabin 27 with the Siebold family.
And Tina, the 12-year-old.
She was also next door for a while, watching TV. She went back to her own cabin, Cabin 28, around 9:30 p.m. after asking what time it was. So the timeline puts all the victims, except for Sheila, back inside that cabin by late evening.
Just getting ready for bed, probably.
Exactly. But this is where the story introduces the immediate connection to the eventual suspects, the movements of the neighbors.
Yes, the neighbors. Marty Smart and Severin John Bobade. They lived in cabin 26, which is what? A stone's throw away.
Barely, a very, very short distance.
Yeah.
And they were known to have been at Keddie's backdoor bar that night, along with Smart's wife, Marilyn.
And Smart actually had an interaction with Stu that night, right?
He did. This is a crucial detail. Around 10 p.m., he allegedly went over to cabin 28 and invited Sue to come out with him. She declined.
So that places him physically at her front door just hours before the estimated time of the murder.
Precisely. The murders happened sometime between late Saturday night, April 11th, and the early morning of Sunday, April 12th.
And the discovery itself, the moment Sheila comes back, that's when everything just explodes.
Sheila returned around 10 a.m. on Sunday morning. She opened the door to cabin 28 and she walked right into the crime scene. She found the bodies of her mother, her brother John, and his friend Dana. All three had been brutally killed in the living room.
The scene must have been just absolute carnage. But the thing I can't get past, the thing we have to analyze, is the fact that three young children, Rick, Greg, and their friend Justin Smart, were in an adjacent bedroom, and they were found asleep, physically unharmed. How does violence on that scale happen without waking three children who are just feet away?
Later investigators, their analysis suggests this wasn't just luck, it was intentional. The perpetrators either deliberately spared that room or just completely avoided it.
So they were focused.
Extremely focused.
Yeah.
To inflict that kind of violence, hammers, knives, a physical struggle without waking three sleeping children, it implies a very high degree of controlled focus.
It makes it feel even more targeted, like Sue was the primary objective.
That's the theory, that the attack was intensely targeted and the killers made sure to maintain control and silence around the area where the children were sleeping.
We should also probably mention the contamination of the crime scene that happened right after the discovery.
It's an important detail because it speaks to the chaos of that moment, and it just compounded the later investigative failures. Jamie Siebold, Sheila's friend from next door, he eventually went into the house through the back door to help Sheila get the younger kids out.
He wasn't trying to hurt anything. He was just trying to help.
Of course.
Yeah.
But in doing so, he potentially contaminated what was already a deeply compromised scene, which just made the initial evidence gathering that much harder.
Let's talk about the MO, the modus operandi. The brutality in the forensic reports it's staggering. This wasn't a quick frenzied attack. It feels like there was sustained effort, preparation, and just this intense rage.
The reports paint a picture of highly personal, what they call multimodal violence, meaning they use several different types of assault. And the preparation is obvious from the fact that Sue, John, and Dana were all tightly restrained.
How were they tied up?
With medical tape and electrical cords. This use of restraints suggests the attackers came prepared. They planned to subdue and control multiple people. This was not an impulsive outburst.
The specific injuries that Sue Sharp suffered, they really illustrate the intent behind this.
The violence against Sue was particularly horrific. She was found nude from the waist down. Her mouth was gagged with a blue bandana and her own underwear, which was then secured with medical tape.
Tightly.
My God. She had multiple stab wounds to her chest. But the most severe injury was to her throat. It was cut horizontally, a very deep, deliberate wound that went through her larynx and even nicked her spine.
And there was more, wasn't there? Something about a rifle.
Yes. Examiners found an imprint on the side of her head that matched the butt of a Daisy 880 Powerline BB pellet rifle. It suggests this non-traditional weapon was used to bludgeon her.
So stabbing, binding, bludgeoning, they were using whatever was there or whatever they brought with them.
A complete commitment to elimination. And that extended to the other victims. John Sharp, the 15-year-old, his throat was slashed just like his mother's. He also has severe blunt force trauma to the head, likely from a hammer.
And Dana Wingate.
Dana, who was 17, also had multiple head injuries, again, likely from a hammer. But his death included this chilling, calculated element. The final cause of death was determined to be manual strangulation. Asphyxiation?
Manual strangulation, that's
Yeah.
different. It's so personal. It requires the killer to be in close, prolonged physical contact. It's not the same kind of frenzy as stabbing or bludgeoning.
It's a signature of control. Of expertise, even. This act strongly supports the later theory that there were at least two killers with different roles.
One driven by rage and the other.
One, maybe smart, driven by that personal, volatile rage you see in the stabbings. The other, likely boobied, provided the chilling criminal competence. the kind you need to ensure elimination and control. You see it in the manual strangulation of Dana and the professional use of the restraints.
And the weapons themselves were just left there.
Left on a table at the scene, 2 bloody knives and a hammer. Almost like a macabre signature.
So the immediate focus was on this horrific scene, but the realization that 12-year-old Tina Sharp was missing completely changed the investigation. It went from a brutal triple homicide to a potential abduction.
It did. And the FBI initially got involved. They treated her disappearance as a possible abduction, which suggests they were considering the possibility of crossing state lines.
But they didn't stay on the case for long.
No, they backed off very quickly. According to the reports, their reasoning was that the California State Department of Justice, the DOJ, was doing an adequate job.
Right.
On a mass murder and an active child abduction. That decision to just withdraw from the case so quickly, it really stands out as one of the first major procedural failures here.
And for the family, for Sheila, the next 3 years must have been just unbearable, waiting for any news about Tina.
And when her remains were finally found, the details were just shocking. And they added this layer of deliberate cold planning to the crime.
Exactly 3 years later. To the day.
Down to the day. On April 11th, 1984, a bottle collector stumbled upon the cranium and mandible of a human skull. This is at a place called Camp 18 near Feather Falls in Butte County.
How far away is that from Keddie?
About 62 miles.
Yeah.
Deep in the wilderness. It took until June of 1984 for the remains to be formally confirmed as Tina Sharp's through dental records.
62 miles. That's not an accidental dumping spot. That takes effort. And when you combine that distance with the unbelievable precision of finding it on the 3-year anniversary, it just screams planning. This is way beyond simple rage. This is organized.
That is the critical analytical jump. Transporting a body 62 miles over difficult mountain roads and picking a spot chosen for maximum concealment.
It requires organization.
It requires resources, time.
There's a theory about the discovery itself, right? That it wasn't an accident.
Right. An online investigator, DMAC, he theorized that the discovery on that specific date was likely not a coincidence. Camp 18 was described as being way off the beaten path, deep in the wild. Not a place you'd expect a casual bottle collector to be.
So someone wanted the remains to be found.
It suggests someone with insider knowledge, maybe the killer or an accomplice, arranged for them to be found. A morbid message, maybe. An acknowledgement of the anniversary. We can only speculate.
The entire initial investigation was a failure, but the way they mishandled 2 specific pieces of evidence, the anonymous call and the hypnosis session, it's just an astonishing breakdown.
The list of investigative failures from that time is, frankly, disastrous. Let's start with that anonymous call. Shortly after Tina's skull was discovered in '84, the Butte County Sheriff's Office gets a call. The person on the other end correctly identifies the remains as Tina Sharp's, referencing the Keddie murders.
So this is someone with insider knowledge of the crime and the secret location of her body?
Yes. A crucial time-sensitive call that could have been voice analyzed immediately.
But it was never documented, never acted on.
Not at all. The evidence was just buried. It was only after the case was reopened after 2013 that a sealed cassette tape of this call was finally found, untouched, at the bottom of an evidence box.
It had never been opened.
Never been opened. They missed a critical chance to identify an insider source, someone who knew the truth, because the tape was left sealed in a box for 30 years.
I can't reconcile that level of professional negligence. Not in a quadruple murder investigation. Leaving a tape like that unopened, it suggests either a profound lack of motivation or something worse.
Like the cover-up theory suggests. A deliberate disregard for evidence that might point toward people who were being protected.
It really says everything about the quality of that original investigation.
It does. Later investigators, like Mike Gamberg, who led the cold case effort, he said the 1981 handling was so poor that someone just coming out of the academy would have done a better job. That's a damning statement.
And then there's the second piece of evidence involving Justin Smart, the 12-year-old who survived.
Right. Justin Smart, one of the 3 unharmed children from the back bedroom. He was obviously deeply traumatized. His initial stories were very conflicting. At one point, he even said he dreamed the murders.
Which led to the hypnosis sessions.
It did. Under hypnosis, with a specialized psychologist, he gave a much more chilling account.
What did he say he saw?
He claimed to have seen Sue struggling with 2 men. And crucially, he saw Tina. He said Tina woke up, came into the living room carrying a blanket, was immediately grabbed by one of the men, and was carried down the back stairs and out of the cabin.
Even if hypnosis isn't perfect evidence, that account, it lines up with everything. It explains why she was taken. She was a witness.
It aligns perfectly with the primary suspect's later alleged confession, where he said he had to kill her because, quote, she saw the whole thing. I couldn't have a witness.
It validates the entire theory. Tina was removed from the scene because she could identify them. That's the motive for her disappearance and for that elaborate disposal 62 miles away. Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and all major podcast platforms. Like, share, and comment on this episode. Drop your review and rating.
So we have this pattern of extreme violence, calculation, and just massive institutional failure. Now we have to focus on the primary suspects, the neighbors in Cabin 26, Marty Smart, and Severin John Bobade.
The men who were questioned right away and then never charged, they lived right next door. And they both had criminal records, didn't they?
They did. Smart was the local guy, but he was also involved in illegal activities, allegedly dealing drugs, manufacturing hashish in Keddie, which apparently had a pretty significant drug scene at the time.
And the motive for Smart, it centers around something personal, doesn't it? Which almost masks the professional competence we see in the crime.
Investigators focused on what they called a complicated triangle between Smart, his wife Marilyn, and Sue Sharp.
What was the connection?
Smart was described as being extremely possessive, jealous, and while it's debated whether Sue was actively counseling Marilyn about leaving him, sources agree that Sue was supportive of Marilyn trying to get out of an abusive marriage.
So the theory is that Smart found out Sue was involved in his marital problems and sought this horrific revenge.
The goal, allegedly, was to teach Sue Sharp a lesson. And the restraints, the weapons, they show they came prepared for a violent confrontation.
That rage motive is terrifying enough. But it leads us directly to the most damning evidence. The evidence that was completely disregarded in 1981.
This is the absolute core of the institutional failure. First, there's the handwritten confession. Just weeks after the murders, while Smart was in Reno, he wrote a letter to his wife, Marilyn.
What did it say?
In the letter, he wrote, I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives. What else do you want?
Bought it with 4 people's lives. That's an explicit written admission, signed by the suspect, linking him directly to the 4 victims.
It's as close to a confession as you will ever find. Decades later, investigator Mike Gamberg looked at that letter and said, if it isn't a confession, it's damn sure close.
And yet, this handwritten admission was officially categorized as what? Overlooked.
Overlooked. It was never properly entered into the evidence log, never used to get an arrest warrant.
The failure is just foundational. But the second piece, the therapist's confession, that's even more specific.
It is. It pushes the failure from just incompetence to something that feels far more deliberate. In May of 1981, Smart starts going to therapy at the VA in Reno, claiming PTSD. And during his 7th session, the counselor says Smart confessed to the murders. He said he felt immense pressure and needed to clear his conscience.
Did he give any specific details to the counselor?
He allegedly confessed to killing Sue Sharp and Tina Sharp, but he specifically distanced himself from the boys' deaths. He said, I didn't have anything to do with the boys.
And what about Tina? Why did he say he killed a 12-year-old girl?
He provided that chilling confirmation that matches Justin's hypnosis account. He said, she saw the whole thing. I couldn't have a witness. The counselor noted that Smart seemed emotionally flat when talking about Sue's murder, but he got visibly stressed and agitated when he talked about Tina.
So, let's be clear. They had a handwritten statement linking the suspect to 4 victims. They had a sworn statement from a mental health professional detailing a specific confession to 2 of the murders, including the motive for the abduction.
Yes.
And yet both Smart and Bubid were allowed to just leave the county, and they died free men. This isn't negligence. This feels like evidence suppression.
The only way to really analyze this is to conclude there is some external motive at play, a systemic desire to avoid prosecuting these 2 men. They were allowed to drive to Oregon. Bubid died in 1988, Smart in 2000. Accountability for them is gone forever.
This brings us to the second suspect, John Bobide. His presence just dramatically expands the scope of this whole thing. It introduces organized crime into what looked like a small-town murder.
Bubid arrived in Keddie just 10 days before the murders. He was staying with Smart. And he wasn't just some local drifter. He had a serious criminal history. He'd served time for armed robbery in Chicago.
And he had mob ties.
Strong documented ties to the Chicago outfit. He was mentored by a high-level enforcer named Jimmy Rennie.
The presence of a known Chicago outfit associate completely changes the analysis. This isn't just about jealousy anymore. This is competence, motive, and a reach that goes way beyond Plumas County.
It provides the explanation for the sophistication of the crime. Boobeed was later traced to Las Vegas, where he was allegedly working as an enforcer and desert hole digger during that era of heavy mob control.
So it was Smart's personal rage combined with Boobeed's cold criminal expertise.
That's what explains the complex MO. The deliberate binding, the manual strangulation, and critically, the sophisticated operation required to dispose of Tina's body 62 miles away. Removing Tina was a professional act of evidence destruction. It was designed to buy them an alibi while she was just a missing person.
The failure to prosecute men who confessed is so extreme that the entire case is now defined by allegations of an institutional cover-up. Where do the sources point? Who was involved?
The finger points right to the top. The Plumas County Sheriff's Office at the time, and more disturbingly, the California Department of Justice. First, there's Sheriff Doug Thomas, who led the 1981 investigation.
And he had a conflict of interest, right?
A profound one. Thomas had previously lived in Cabin 28 himself, before the Sharks moved in. Smart even claimed that Thomas was a great pal, and that the sheriff had let him stay in Cabin 28 temporarily when he was having problems with his wife.
A sheriff who is personal friends with the main suspect and has a connection to the crime scene itself? That's a dark stage for an investigation.
It is. But the immediate involvement of the DOJ is maybe the most confounding part of this.
Why is that?
Why did Sheriff Thomas immediately call the DOJ? And why did the DOJ send two highly specialized, organized crime special agents, Harry Bradley and P.A. Krim, instead of their top homicide investigators?
That's a very good question.
Investigator Gamberg believes it was a calculated move. He thinks the DOJ already had an interest in Boobeed and may have been protecting him because of his connections to larger, more sensitive criminal enterprises.
So you're suggesting that Boobeed was shielded because of his links to, what, major drug trafficking operations or something similar?
That is precisely the speculation among serious investigators looking at this cold case. The idea that Boobeed was part of a larger, protected network. But regardless of the specifics, the critical question is this. Was the priority in 1981 to solve a brutal local murder? Or was it to protect Boobeed and his connections from being exposed?
The actions of the investigators seem to answer that question.
They overwhelmingly favor the theory that Boobeed was shielded.
Let's just list some of the specific failures that point to a cover-up. The sheer number of them is staggering.
Beyond the unopened tape, look at how they handle the suspects. Smart famously bragged about his polygraph test. He told his therapist he beat it, boasting that he was lying the whole time, but that they let me go.
So either the test was flawed, or they just chose to ignore it.
And even after he's bragging about lying, the DOJ agents, the organized crime experts, they dismiss the therapist's detailed confession as mere hearsay.
It's not hearsay. It's a professional statement. It's serious legal evidence.
Of course it is. They actively disregarded it. Even worse, Marilyn Smart, Marty's wife, later claimed that investigators actually told the suspects to get out of town after they were questioned.
To advise two primary suspects in a quadruple homicide to flee the jurisdiction? If that's true, that's not incompetence. That's active complicity, obstruction of justice.
It's the strongest evidence we have that the priority was getting them out of Plumas County, not prosecuting them. The failures were everywhere. The crime scene wasn't secured. They used an amateur with no training for the suspect's sketches instead of a forensic artist.
It all just adds up.
The later assessment that someone just coming out of the academy would have done a better job is the final indictment. It confirms that Smart and Boobeed walked free, not because there was no evidence, but because that evidence was intentionally buried.
So for over 30 years, the file just sat there, collecting dust. But around 2013, the case got a new life.
It did. And that was driven by the deep personal connection of the modern teen. The Plumas County Sheriff at the time, Greg Hagwood, was a teenager in 1981. He knew the victims. He knew the trauma this crime caused the community.
And he appointed a special investigator.
Mike Gamberg, a retired deputy who also knew John Sharp and Dana Wingate personally. For them, this was about community duty. It was about personal justice.
And that determination led to a pretty dramatic breakthrough in 2016, finding a weapon that had been hidden in plain sight for decades.
It was a pivotal discovery. A man was using a metal detector in a dried-up pond near the Keddie Resort entrance, and he found a steel blue-handled claw hammer. Gamberg secured it immediately.
And the location of that pond is key.
It was just a short distance from Cabin 26, where Smart and Boobeed lived.
A bludgeoning weapon, the kind used to shatter their skulls, was sitting right next to the killer's cabin for 35 years. It just proves that the evidence was intentionally concealed right there.
And the hammer matched the description of one Martin Smart had claimed was missing from his own tools after the murders. Sheriff Hagwood confirmed it was intentionally put there. It wasn't accidentally lost.
So they sent it for forensic analysis.
Yes, along with a recovered hunting knife. They were hoping modern technology, specifically rust removal, could yield some microscopic biological evidence.
And if the hammer was the physical link, the next breakthrough was the biological one, the one that points to a suspect who is still alive.
The DNA match. This is the most critical piece of current evidence. In April 2018, Gamberg announced they had successfully recovered DNA from a piece of medical tape used to bind the victims at the scene.
And they got a match.
A successful match to a known living suspect.
A living suspect. That changes everything. Because Smart and Boubied are both dead. This DNA links a person who is alive today directly to the bindings used on the victims.
That's the absolute reality of where this investigation stands. As of now, the case is active, unsolved, but the focus is squarely on this DNA suspect. Investigators have publicly confirmed they know who this person is and where they are.
Which leads to the one question that continues to frustrate everyone. If there's a DNA match to a living person from the binding tape, why hasn't an arrest been made after all this time?
The delay is likely because of the institutional failures of the past. A DNA match alone, while it's damning, might be seen as circumstantial. The defense could argue the person was there at another time, before the crime.
So prosecutors need more.
They need sufficient additional evidence to win a case this old. A case where the main suspects are dead and the original crime scene documentation was abysmal. They have to build a bulletproof case that can withstand 4 decades of rot before they move to indict.
This points to the current theory that Smart and Boubied weren't acting alone.
The current investigative theory is that the crime, the cover-up, the disposal of Tina's body, it involved a network of people, possibly up to 6 individuals.
6 people.
Sheriff Hagwood has said publicly he believes they've identified a handful of people still alive who, at a minimum, have first-hand information, and at a maximum participated or helped destroy evidence. The DNA match likely identifies one of these accomplices.
To deal with all this complexity, Gamberg sought outside help, didn't he?
He did. He reached out to the Viddoc Society. It's a group of about 80 forensic experts, retired FBI profilers, scientists, veteran homicide investigators. They reviewed all the new evidence, the hammer, the DNA, the call tape, along with the original files to provide a fresh perspective. It just shows how dedicated the modern team is to overcoming the failures of the past.
The Keddie Cabin Murders really do stand as this horrific monument to a failure of justice. When you put it all together, the victims found bound and bludgeoned, Tina's skull found 62 miles away years later. Confessions were made and ignored. The murder weapon is found near the killer's cabin. And today, DNA links a living suspect to the binding tape. And yet, the case is still officially unsolved.
The impact on that small community was crippling. Investigator Gamberg said the crime killed this community. Keddie was gone. Keddie was absolutely finished. Cabin 28, the site of the horror, was finally demolished in 2004. But the trauma for the family, it never goes away.
And the fight for justice has rested for 44 years on the shoulders of the survivor, Sheila Sharp, the girl who found the bodies that morning. Her commitment is the main reason this case was ever reopened with the resources it needed.
Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and all major podcast platforms. Like, share, and comment. Give us your positive review and rating.
Despite all the delays, the deaths of the main suspects, the modern investigation does provide some hope. Sheriff Hagwood's commitment is absolute. He has a quote. He said, "If it's a deathbed confession, I'll take it. The goal now is just closure and accountability."
And the Plumas County Sheriff's Office is still seeking information. Anyone who might know anything, no matter how small, is urged to call the Keddie hotline at 283-6360 or the Sheriff's Office directly at 283-6300. Even after 44 years, every detail matters.
The DNA evidence, combined with those lost confessions, it means the next chapter of this story isn't about identifying the killers. We know who they were. They were identified decades ago through their own admissions.
The next phase has to be about accountability. Accountability for the living accomplices who helped with the murders and the disposal of Tina Sharp. They're still out there, they're walking free, and they know the truth.
So the final thought for you, the listener, is this. When a system fails so completely to prosecute the dead, what institutional forces could still be at work protecting the living?